Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The crisp autumn air buzzed with energy as Lydia walked through the sprawling courtyard of Arcane Tower, her mind swirling with excitement and trepidation. The towering spires of the academy loomed high above her, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch across time itself. For centuries, the headmaster of the academy had always been the most powerful Magia and unbroken line of legendary wizards. Today, that tradition was about to change. Lydia glanced around at the other students milling about, their voices in excited murmur. Everyone was talking about the election. The grand announcement had come just days before, delivered by Master Aldrian himself, the current headmaster. The school would no longer be ruled by a single all-powerful wizard. Instead, every student, professor, and staff member would cast their vote. For the first time, the fate of the academy would be decided by the people within it. She felt a mix of excitement and unease. Democracy was something they'd studied in history, a relic of the distant lands outside the magic world. The idea of electing a leader through popular vote, rather than power, felt foreign here. For some, it was a sign of progress. For others, a threat to the ancient ways. Lydia, a second-year apprentice, didn't have the influence or the confidence to voice her own opinions in these matters, but she couldn't help being drawn to the potential of change. It made her wonder, what kind of headmaster would the academy really need? Her thoughts were interrupted as she passed a group of older students gathered near the great fountain in the courtyard. They were all discussing the frontrunner, Professor Darius. His name was on everyone's lips. The whispers of his inevitable victory had spread through the halls since the announcement. "He's the only real candidate," said one student, his voice carrying a note of admiration. "No one else stands a chance. He's the most powerful wizard since Aldrian himself." Lydia walked past them, quickening her pace. Professor Darius. She'd never had him for any of her classes, but she'd heard enough to know that he was feared and revered in equal measure. He was known for his mastery of enchantments, though there was something about him that made Lydia's skin prickle with unease. She couldn't explain it, but the way people spoke about him, as though he were already headmaster, felt wrong. It was as though he was destined to win, as though the election was just a formality. Her thoughts stayed with her as she arrived at the great hall. The interior was as vast as it was ancient, with walls lined with portraits of former headmasters, their eyes seeming to follow her as she walked. She found a spot at the back, blending in with the crowd of students who had gathered for the official announcement of the candidates. Master Aldrian stood at the front of the hall, his long silver beard glowing softly in the candlelight, his voice rich with authority as he addressed the school. "Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for our academy," Aldrian said, his voice echoing through the hall. "For centuries, the headmaster has been chosen based on power alone. But the world is changing, and so too must we. This election will allow every voice to be heard. Every vote will matter." A murmur spread through the crowd, some nodding in agreement, others remaining silent. Lydia glanced around, catching sight of Professor Darius standing off to the side, his dark robes shimmering in the light. His expression was calm, calculated, his gaze sweeping across the students like a predator watching prey. Master Aldrian continued, listing the names of the candidates, each one stepping forward to polite applause. There were only 4 in total, and though each candidate held impressive credentials, it was clear that Darius was the favorite. When he stepped forward, the applause was louder, more enthusiastic. Lydia felt a chill run down her spine. "Thank you, Headmaster Aldrian," Darius said smoothly, his voice deep and resonant. "I am honored to be a part of this historic election. The academy is my home, and its future is all that matters to me. I vow to uphold the values that have made this place great for centuries." The crowd roared in approval. Lydia clenched her fists, feeling a knot of frustration tighten in her chest. Something about his words felt a broken bar wrong. It was as if he was trying too hard, as if he was already claiming victory. She shook the thought away, telling herself she was overthinking things. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur, and soon, the students were dismissed to return to their dormitories. Lydia lingered in the hall, her mind still buzzing with unease. As she made her way back through the dimly lit corridors of the academy, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. That night, sleep eluded her. Her dreams were filled with strange visions of dark shadows whispering in the corners of her mind, warning her of something dangerous lurking beneath the surface of the election. The next day, Lydia found herself assigned to a task in the Academy's library, a vast and labyrinthine space filled with ancient tomes and scrolls that held the history of magic itself. She was tasked with delivering a note to one of the senior professors in the restricted section of the library, a place few students were allowed to enter. She moved quietly through the towering shelves, the air thick with the scent of old parchment. As she neared the restricted section, she noticed a faint glow coming from beyond one of the heavy iron doors. Curiosity gnawed at her, and despite her better judgment, Lydia crept closer. She reached the door and peered through the crack, her breath catching in her throat as she saw Professor Darius standing in the center of the room. He was surrounded by a group of his most loyal followers, their faces hidden in the shadows. They were speaking in hushed tones, their words muffled, but Lydia caught enough to understand what was happening. "We must ensure that the election goes according to plan," Darius said, his voice low and commanding. "The Academy must be under my control. The others are broken bar they are weak. They will only lead this place to ruin. We cannot allow that." One of his followers nodded, stepping forward with a small, glowing object in his hand. Lydia squinted, trying to make out what it was. A crystal? No, an enchanted charm. Darius took it and held it up, his eyes gleaming with a sinister light. "This will ensure our victory," he said. "With the right magic, we can control the outcome. The students will vote for me, whether they realize it or not." Lydia's heart raced, her mind reeling. Forbidden magic, mind control. Darius was planning to use enchantments to manipulate the election, to force the students to vote for him. She felt a surge of panic, her feet frozen to the spot. She had to get out of there. She had to tell someone. But who would believe her? Darius was respected, feared, and powerful. If she accused him without proof, it would be her word against his, and she would surely be expelled or worse. Taking a deep breath, Lydia slowly backed away from the door, her mind racing. She needed a plan. She needed allies. Over the next few days, Lydia moved through the academy with a newfound sense of purpose. She couldn't let Darius get away with his scheme, but she knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed help, and she knew exactly who to turn to. Her first stop was Alara, her best friend and a skilled illusionist. Alara was quick to believe her, her eyes widening in shock as Lydia explained what she had overheard. "Forbidden magic? That's a broken bar. That's insane," Alara whispered. "But if Darius is really using it, we can't just stand by and do nothing." Together, they began to recruit others they could trust, those students who were brave enough to stand against the most powerful professor in the academy. They enlisted Gareth, a fiery combat mage with a temper to match his abilities, Finn, a clever enchanter who specialized in protective wards, and Ingrid, a quiet but brilliant potion maker who could brew concoctions that might help them in their fight. The group met in secret, their discussions filled with hushed whispers and nervous glances. They knew the stakes were high, but Lydia's determination was unwavering. "We have to stop him," she said, her voice steady. "If we don't, he'll control the entire academy. This election was supposed to be about freedom and choice. We can't let him take that away." As they planned, the group gathered more evidence, slipping into the shadows to eavesdrop on Darius's conversations, uncovering more about the enchanted charms he was using to manipulate the votes. Each discovery fueled their resolve, but also increased the danger. Darius's influence was spreading, and it wasn't long before he began to suspect that someone was watching him. One evening, as Lydia and her group gathered in the dark corners of the academy's greenhouse to finalize their next move, a shadow passed outside the window. The air became tense, and a flicker of light at the doorway caught Lydia's eye. Her heart skipped a beat. Darius's suspicions had grown, and she was certain his followers were watching them. Gareth leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "We need to act fast. If Darius catches wind of what we're planning, it'll be over before we even get started." Lydia nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. They had gathered enough information to expose Darius's plot, but now came the most dangerous part, executing their plan. Finn spread out a parchment on the table, enchanted runes glowing softly along its edges. "We'll use words to disrupt the enchantments during the final vote. I've crafted a charm that can cancel the mind control magic, but we'll need to place it in the voting hall right before the ballots are cast. And we need to be careful," Allure added. "Darius's followers are everywhere. If they catch us trying to interfere, we're done." The final vote was set to take place the next day in the Great Hall, and the entire academy would be present. It was the perfect opportunity for Darius to solidify his control, but it was also the only chance Lydia and her group had to expose him. As they made their way through the dim corridors that night, the silence felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. Lydia's pulse quickened as they reached the outskirts of the Great Hall, where a faint glow seeped through the cracks of the door. Inside, Darius's followers were already setting up for the vote, and Lydia could see the enchanted charms being discreetly placed beneath the voting booths. "Now," she whispered to Finn, who nodded and handed her the disruption charm they had created. It was small, barely the size of a coin, but powerful enough to nullify the mind control spells Darius had woven. Lydia felt a jolt of fear as she slipped into the shadows, moving quietly along the edges of the room. She had only moments to place the charm before Darius and the others returned to oversee the final preparations. Her hands trembled as she reached the nearest voting booth, tucking the disruption charm underneath the enchanted crystal hidden within. Allure and Gareth stood watch near the door, while Ingrid prepared a potion in case things went wrong. Finn, meanwhile, moved to the far side of the hall, preparing a secondary ward in case their first attempt failed. Just as Lydia placed a last charm, the door to the Great Hall creaked open, and Professor Darius entered, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Lydia ducked behind one of the tall columns, holding her breath as Darius and his followers began discussing the upcoming vote. "We've done everything necessary," Darius said, his voice low but full of confidence. "Once the ballots are cast, the headmastership will be mine. No one can stop it now." Lydia's heart raced as she listened, her mind whirling with the possibilities. They had set everything in motion, but now they had to wait until the voting began. The next day, the entire academy gathered in the Great Hall, the air buzzing with anticipation. Lydia stood with her group, their eyes scanning the room for any signs that Darius had noticed their interference. So far, everything seemed to be going according to plan. Master Aldrian took the stage, his voice commanding silence as he addressed the assembly. "Today marks a historic moment for our academy," he said. "For the first time, we were all given the opportunity to choose our future. The vote will determine who leads this institution into the next era." Lydia watched as the students and faculty lined up to cast their votes. Each person stepped into one of the enchanted booths, placing their hand on the crystal as they submitted their choice. Her heart pounded with every vote cast, knowing that the disruption charm was working silently beneath the surface. Then, as Darius approached the voting booth, Lydia felt a sudden jolt of panic. What if he realized something was wrong? What if he sensed the magic they had used to counteract his enchantments? Darius stepped into the booth, his eyes narrowing as he placed his hand on the crystal. For a moment, the air in the room seemed to still. Lydia held her breath, waiting for something to happen. But then, Darius withdrew his hand, his expression calm, and stepped back into the crowd. Lydia exhaled slowly. So far, so good. As the final votes were cast and the ballots were collected, Master Aldrian returned to the stage. "The results will now be tallied," he announced, motioning for the enchanted urns to be brought forward. The urns, glowing with a faint magical light, were designed to read the votes and reveal the winner. Lydia's heart pounded in her chest as the urns began their work. A soft hum filled the room as the magic inside them stirred, calculating the results. The entire hall watched in silence, waiting for the outcome. Then, just as the urns were about to reveal the winner, something went wrong. The light inside the urns flickered, and a dark shadow passed through the air. Lydia's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. Darius had triggered his backup plan, a final enchantment that would override the vote if anything went wrong. "No," Lydia whispered, her pulse racing. She looked to Finn, who nodded. They had prepared for this. Without hesitation, Lydia stepped forward, her hands crackling with energy as she activated the disruption charm. The room was filled with a blinding light as the magic surged through the hall, shattering Darius's final enchantment. The urns flickered again, their glow returning to normal. Darius's eyes flashed with anger, and for a moment, Lydia thought he might attack her right then and there. But before he could react, Master Aldrian stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "What is the meaning of this?" Aldrian demanded, his gaze locking onto Darius. Lydia stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear churning inside her. "Professor Darius has been using forbidden magic to manipulate the election," she said. "He's been controlling the votes with enchantments, forcing people to vote for him." Gasps filled the room, and all eyes turned to Darius, who stood frozen in place, his expression darkening. "That's a serious accusation," Aldrian said, his tone grave. "Do you have proof?" Lydia nodded, gesturing to the voting booths. "We place disruption charms beneath the booths to counteract the enchantments. You can see for yourself." Master Aldrian motioned for one of the senior professors to investigate, and within moments, the truth was revealed. The enchanted crystals Darius had used to manipulate the votes were exposed, their dark magic still faintly glowing. Darius's face twisted with fury, and he stepped forward, his hand crackling with raw energy. "You foolish girl!" he spat, his voice filled with venom. "Do you really think you can stop me? I've worked too hard for this." But before he could unleash his magic, Aldrian raised his hand, and a powerful barrier of light formed between Darius and the students. "Enough, Darius," Aldrian said, his voice calm but firm. "You've broken the laws of this academy and violated the trust of its people. You will not be headmaster." For a moment, Darius stood frozen, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. But then, with a growl of frustration, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the hall, his dark robes billowing behind him. As the door slammed shut behind him, a heavy silence fell over the room. Master Aldrian turned to Lydia, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You have done this academy a great service today," he said. "You and your friends have protected the very foundation of what this election stands for, freedom and choice." Lydia felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was tempered by exhaustion. The battle has been won, but at a cost. Her magic, already weakened from the disruption charms, felt drained, and she knew it would take time to recover. But in that moment, standing in the great hall with her friends beside her, she knew they had done the right thing. As the final vote was tallied fairly, this time a new headmaster was chosen. It wasn't Darius, nor was it one of his followers. Instead, a humble and wise professor, one who had spent years teaching the students without seeking power, was elected to lead the academy into its new era. Lydia watched as the hall erupted into applause, a sense of peace settling over the crowd. The academy would continue, stronger than ever, with its values intact. And as she looked around at her friends Alara, Gareth, Finn, and Ingrida, she knew they had forged something stronger than magic, a bond of trust and friendship that would last a lifetime. The end of the election was not just the end of a battle for the Academy's future. It was the beginning of something new for Lydia. She may have lost some of her magic, but she had gained something far more important: a sense of purpose, and the knowledge that even the smallest voice could make a difference in a world of powerful magic.